primarily dialogue, with no strong interest in world building or character development. Still, there's something about them that I really enjoy, and even though some of the concepts are dated, I still really like thinking about the ideas that he put forward. To put it simply, it's something I enjoy, but would not necessarily recommend to other people unless that I knew that they already like science fiction and would be interested in how this was influential in the development of the genre. Regardless if you read it or not, if you're here, one of the things you've probably heard about it is that it pioneered ideas that series like Dune and Star Wars would use later on. That Asimov was the first to go big with this idea of the Galactic Empire. I suppose that's the case. I mean, this is the one that people know about anyway. With all the pulp writers that were working and churning stuff out before him, it's probably an idea that was out there. But Foundation is the one that everybody knows about. What makes the series relatable is also what makes it somewhat dated now. I said it was a future history, and essentially what he did was he took the Roman Empire and applied the same sort of thing on a bigger scale across the whole galaxy. He got the idea after reading the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, which was a late 18th century historical series by Edward Gibbons. It's relatable in that they're doing things that humans do, things that they've done historically. But it feels dated because you would expect that over 20,000 years, humanity, society, ideas of government, you would expect that they would evolve in some way. That's something I'll come back to at the end. But now let's look at the things we know about Asimov's Galactic Empire. It's in our galaxy, the Milky Way. It's made up of about 25 million planets. And it's mentioned that the population was 500 quadrillion residents early on in the Empire. For reference, a quadrillion is 1,000 trillions. The Empire was founded at around the year 10,000 CE on our calendar. When the main story picks up, the Empire has been around for nearly 12,000 years. So the year would be something like 21,000 and change on our calendar. The colonization was made possible by hyperspace travel. And this is the thing that kind of makes this whole idea and every other Galactic Empire story that came after it somewhat inevitable. Once you start to imagine a time when technology that can create things that make faster than light travel possible, then it's only a matter of time until people start to colonize all the different planets, at least the ones that have breathable atmospheres. In Foundation's empire, there's only humans. There's no intelligent alien species. All these humans came from Earth, but by this point in their history, they don't remember that anymore. We hear characters talk about the origin question, and it's generally accepted that all humans must have evolved on one planet, but there's not a general consensus of what that planet is or what happened to it. The Empire is ruled by one person, the Emperor, and he runs things from the capital planet of Trantor, which I'll talk about in a minute. There's another group of people called the Spacers who left Earth and aren't involved with the Empire, but they're really not important at this point in the story. So basically, humans from Earth spread out to everywhere that they could. Populations continue to multiply. Because everyone else is a member of the Empire, there are galactic standards. So everybody speaks the same language. There's standard galactic time and the standard galactic day. Obviously, all these planets would have different orbits, different night and day cycles, but they all have a 24-hour day and an agreed upon calendar. Since we're already 12,000 years on, there's really no mention of how they made these planets livable in the main Foundation series. At this point, they're all basically like different versions of Earth. I mentioned that this story was written in the 1940s. That was a time where there was a lot of technological advances. Because of the war, there was a lot of new things that were developed, but not really on the consumer end. So when Asimov was writing these stories, the idea of computers, especially things like home computers, portable computers, they were still decades away. There's really no mention of computers in the original trilogy, although decades later, when he came back to write the sequels, he did update the technology to include computers and other things like that. The other technological thing that might seem weird, especially considering Asimov's other big series is about them, is that there aren't any robots in the main trilogy. Towards the end of his career, he did introduce ties between the Foundation and Robot series. They do exist in the same continuity now, but there's really no robot characters in the original Foundation trilogy. That was originally written as short stories, printed individually in Astounding magazine. When those were collected in the fix-up novels, he wrote one new chapter to serve as an introduction. The first chapter you read in Foundation is the last thing he wrote at that time, and it does a great job of describing the Empire's capital planet of Trantor. I'm going to do a full breakdown of what life on Trantor is like, but as a preview, I'll say that it is an ecumenopolis, a city that covers the entire planet. It's located as close to the center of the galaxy as possible, where conditions are still ideal for human life, and it has a population of around 40 billion in the beginning of the Foundation trilogy. As far as what the Galactic Empire's citizenry looks like 21,000 years in the future, according to Asimov, basically everybody is multiracial. On my trailer breakdown, I had a lot of people complaining in the comments about this looking like a woke version of Foundation because of the gender swaps and the fact that some of these characters are played by actors of color. But in reality, that's consistent with the source material, or at the very least, the author's intention. In the Galactic Empire, it seems the idea is that people are basically different shades of brown, more than they're divided by the way that we look at race now with whites, blacks, Asians, and so on. I guess to wrap things up, one big difference about Asimov's Empire compared to some of the others that followed in its footsteps is that it's not necessarily an evil empire. It's really just one that has evolved to the place where it's no longer effective. In the blurb that I opened the video with, it's Harry Seldon, and he's explaining some of these factors. A rising bureaucracy, loss of initiative, lack of upward mobility, a lessening of curiosity, of exploration, and the people who have power holding on to it to the extent that they begin to lose the connection with the citizens, and therefore their usefulness comes into question. So when it starts to fall, they start to lose control over the planets that are in the periphery, the ones that are farthest from the center. And as time goes on, their ability to hold on to those civilizations weakens. Because this begins to happen out there, and most of the people who are really powerful within the Empire structure are located towards the center, they would find it very hard to believe that the Empire was falling at all. There's really no immediate effect on their lives or the communities they live in, so they're somewhat blind to what's actually going on. I will cover more of this as I do the next couple videos where I talk about Trantor and get into the idea of psychohistory. I want to do that separately. I want to look at it rather closely for a couple of reasons. One, it's interesting, and also because on reread, that is the part that feels most out of step of where we're at. The idea behind forming the Foundation, it's pretty much rooted in a technocratic ideal, which makes sense for the time. Obviously, at the end of World War II, they were hoping things would be different going forward. After the last 13 years or so, after the last year especially, it's been becoming more clear that an educated group of elites are probably not going to save us. And that's not to say that the book is no longer an interesting thought experiment. Most of what's interesting about it, most of the tension, comes from carrying the plan out, thinking about what that means, seeing how they do that, and thinking about how you might react if faced with similar situations. So that's something that we'll look at in future videos. For now, this feels like a good place to leave it. If you have a passing interest in the history of humanity and the history of empire, how they come to an end, I certainly don't want to discourage you from reading the series. If what you're hearing here sounds interesting, I did provide links to the books in the video description. If you're on the fence, you can also find it out there. There's a BBC version of this, like a radio version, where they have actors read different parts. That's a pretty good free introduction to the series. The one recommendation I would make, and I feel pretty strongly about this, is don't read the prequels first. Don't read it in chronological order. Without giving away spoilers, I'll just say that publication order is far superior in this instance. So let me know what you think about this empire, how it stacks up against others from popular sci-fi franchises. Let me know if you have any questions, what you're hoping to see in the Apple adaptation, and if you think that they'll be able to pull it off. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. This is just the beginning of the Foundation content I'm planning on making over the summer. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.
Choose the next level. Play now.
All I have now is this, my Prime Radiant. This is the means by which psychohistory can be computed, through which every equation in my plan may be analyzed. All here in this amazing small black cube. What I see before me, around me, is the future of humanity. 30,000 years of potential chaos compressed into a single millennium. Hey guys, Pete here. Today I'm going to look at Isaac Asimov's fictional science of psychohistory. With the upcoming Apple TV Plus series, I decided to explain this in the most spoiler-free way. I'm going to focus on how it was introduced in the original Foundation stories, and at least for now, stay away from the conclusions in history that Asimov tacked on when he came back to revisit the series in the 1980s. Not because those things aren't important, but because they give away some important information that could take away from the ending. In simple terms, psychohistory is the mathematical study of the course of humanity. It looks at how large groups or mobs of people react in response to things like economic and social stimuli. In modern terms, we would think of it as a data science that can be used to generate probabilistic predictions of future events. This doesn't work on the level of individuals. Asimov modeled the concept on the kinetic theory of gases. In his own words, he described it like this. The molecules making up gases moved in an absolutely random fashion in any direction in 3 dimensions and in a wide range of speeds. Nevertheless, one could fairly describe what those motions would be on the average and work out the gas laws from those average motions with an enormous degree of precision. In other words, although one couldn't possibly predict what a single molecule would do, one could accurately predict what octillions of them would do. So I applied that notion to human beings. Each individual human being might have free will, but a huge mob of them should behave with some sort of predictability, and the analysis of mob behavior was my psychohistory. It's a social science, and later in his career, Asimov conceded that he should have named it psychosociology instead, but at the time he was so intent on using the word history because he got the idea for the story from his second reading of Edward Gibbon's The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. The mathematician Harry Seldon spent his life developing psychohistory, and in the process learned that it predicted the fall of the Galactic Empire. Harry developed what would become known as Seldon's plan to shorten the human suffering in the gap between the fall of the first and the rise of the new empire. This is what he's referring to in the reading I opened the video with. Psychohistory predicts that after the empire falls, that will be followed by 30,000 years of chaos and barbarism. If applied, the Seldon plan can shorten that to 1,000 years by accelerating the pace of developing the Second Empire, which is guided by the Foundations. Right around here, you might be thinking that psychohistory can solve all of humanity's problems and usher in utopia. It would actually make for a pretty dull story if you think it through. Where things start off in the original trilogy is that psychohistory and the Selden plan have been developed, but the fall of the Galactic Empire, that's too far along to be prevented. This is made more complicated because on the surface, things seem to be going fine, especially for those that hold power in the Empire. Nobody wants to hear or believe what Harry Seldon has to say, and to keep things interesting, Asimov added some logical axioms that are necessary for psychohistory to be effective. Seldon himself established the original pair of these. The first is that the population whose behavior was modeled should be sufficiently large. This reinforces that it can't be applied to the actions of individuals or situations involving small groups within a population. Second, that the population should remain in ignorance of the results of the application of psychohistorical analyses, because if it is aware, the group changes its behavior. This is where things get interesting and where most of the tension in the first book comes from. You can develop a plan, but telling too many people how it works undermines its effectiveness. This is because it works best with a limited amount of independent variables, and where free will is somewhat constrained. To put it simply, people have to agree to follow a plan that they don't understand more or less blindly, and then it's gonna take several generations before it's realized. It's not a spoiler to say that Foundation covers a lot of ground time-wise. It moves through more than 3 centuries over the first 3 books. While it doesn't make it to the 1,000-year mark to see the conclusion of Seldon's plan, the final book in the series chronologically, Foundation and Earth, takes place nearly 500 years after Harry Seldon dies. In that time, new axioms are added to keep up with the twists that Asimov introduces to keep things interesting. After all, if everyone just followed psychohistory and everything went smoothly, it wouldn't be very exciting, and it also wouldn't much resemble the humanity that we know. If the TV show lasts long enough to produce the 7 seasons they're hoping for, we'll get to see how the existence of psychohistory affects things and how Seldon's plan unfolds for the Foundations. There are 2 of them, and Harry set it up that way from the beginning, and although I guess that's a different video altogether, it is worth mentioning that the 2 Foundations are set up to operate independently, with the second doing so in secret. So while Harry isn't telling very many people what he knows is in store for humanity, psychohistory does provide a plan that gives them the best opportunity to make it to the point where the Second Empire is established. The plan also recognizes that there will be crises along the way. So even though Harry Seldon isn't immortal, he does die of old age early in the story, he has things set up where he can still influence the Foundations at key moments in their development. In the show, you'll see how he manages that when they reach the first predicted crisis. In a video like this, I guess it makes sense to ask the question, is psychohistory something that could work? Can we see something like this in the real world? Your guess is as good as mine. If you go looking for them, there are plenty of essays, discussions, and debates out there. You can find arguments for and against psychohistory being viable. I lean towards the skeptical side. I don't think that we'll ever see anything that works as precisely as psychohistory. I like the idea. It develops an interesting situation, and I especially like seeing how different characters react to that over multiple generations. Basing it on the kinetic theory of gases is a novel idea, but are molecules and people comparable? The human brain, the human condition and behavior, it all seems too complicated to express mathematically. Then again, if humanity is still around in 20,000 years, who's to say? To be fair, when he came up with this concept, personal computers were a long way off. It's interesting to see how things have developed in data science, but the applications don't seem to be moving in that direction. Either way, it makes for an interesting series of stories, so it doesn't matter if it ever becomes a reality. One last thing, in the passage I opened with, it mentioned the Prime Radiant. That's the device that stores the psychohistorical equations which show the future development of humanity. It's basically a big map of what's going to happen. The equations are projected, and the operator can zoom in to look at the details and even change things. It is the psychohistorian's tool, and there's only a few of them out there. And I think that's a good place to leave things. It looks like the show's going to be airing on Apple TV in September. There's no official release date yet though. That might mean we'll get a full trailer soon, maybe next month, and I can't wait to see that. You still got time to dip into the book, so I'll put links to those in the description. I think at this stage you'd have to start with the book foundation and then finish the original trilogy. From there you could decide if you wanted to go into the robot series or how you wanted to approach the books that came out in the 80s. The one strong recommendation I would make is to not read the Foundation prequels until last. The second prequel, Forward the Foundation, is the last book Asimov wrote before he died, and that adds some weight to ending the series with it. It also brings things full circle in a satisfying way, and there really isn't any reason I can think of to read it in chronological order, unless you just want to diminish the mystery of Harry Seldon and get spoiled on how the series ends at the very beginning. I reread all 15 books this year, including the Empire series, which isn't completely essential, and that's a big investment of time, so it'll all depend on how much you want to get into it. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you have questions about psychohistory or about the series, let me know. If you've already read the books, what are you most looking forward to seeing? If you want to talk spoilers, that's fine, but just mark those accordingly. Don't give away the twists. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.
Sorry, brother.
You are no brother to me. Nor to Cleon the First, nor to any other Cleon who walked these polished floors.
You are a deformity.
And if I had my way, you would already be ash.
Hey guys, Pete here. Today I'm going to explain the ending of Foundation Season 1. The season just wrapped up with the release of Episode 10, The Leap, and it provided some answers to lingering questions while setting things up for the future of the series and Season 2. I'm going to look at what happened to Harry Seldon, what does it all mean for the Foundation, what happened to Azora and Brother Dawn and the conspiracy there, what will happen to the Genetic Dynasty and Demerzel, and what happened to Gale and Salvor Hardin. Just a quick spoiler warning, if you haven't watched the entire first season of Foundation on Apple TV Plus, including the ending, then this video won't be for you. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. Episode 9 ended with the death of Farah, in the midst of the conflict between the different factions of the Outer Reach taking place on Terminus. Harry Seldon emerged from the vault, and he seemed alright with what was happening. In the finale, we get a better understanding of how he came to be there, and what it all means for psychohistory in the Foundation. He's a projection, and he explains to Polly, who asked him if he was the ghost, that he took a pill that contained millions of self-replicating molecular machines. Those broke his body down inside the coffin that he had made, and it recycled that material, transforming into the vault on its way to Terminus. So the vault is actually made of him, but over those decades he wasn't awake, he wasn't sentient that whole time. He explains that his reawakening was triggered by the Anacreon's arrival. He says that it takes time to rebuild consciousness, and when Salvor tries to connect things to the null field expanding, he explains that it's just part of the vault's natural defenses. Harry addresses the Anacreons and Thespins, saying that they've hated each other for so long that the origin of their feud is almost irrelevant. And he explains that the first clone, Cleon II, is responsible for setting things in motion. The generations of hate between these two cultures that we saw was ongoing in Episode 1 when they came to Trantor all traces back to what's called the First Betrayal, where Cleon II had his Shadow Master murder an Anacreon Grand Huntress and blame it on the Thespin king she just married. The point was that this marriage was going to bring together these two emerging powers in the Outer Reach, and that would be a threat to the Empire's power. So the Emperor decided to undermine that, knowing that it would get them to fight each other, and then he wouldn't have to deal with it. Now Harry says he needs them to put that behind them and come together. He selected the original colonists on Terminus to have the seeds of a future civilization, and the others are survivors. They've been cast aside by the Empire and they're still there. Under the genetic dynasty, there's only room for one story and one voice, and he believes that that stagnation guarantees that the Empire will fall, and that will be followed by a dark age that lasts 30,000 years. It was always part of his plan for these three cultures in the Outer Reach to come together. He explains that he found the pattern in the jumps of the Invictus, and that their discovering it would be a potential step ahead for the Foundation's development. He explains that the idea of them curating knowledge for the encyclopedia was only a cover story. The Foundation was never about that. It was about curating people. And when one of the Foundationers echoes what he says about them not being revolutionaries, he says that he may have lied about that point. There's still a problem in that the Empire is still going to come investigate what happened to Dorwin's ship, who was there in the first place to investigate what happened to the comms buoy. Harry tells them that they won't come if they think they're already dead, and he tells them to use the Invictus to create a false mega flare. Something like that would wipe out all life in the system, and therefore there would be no reason for them to come into a situation where there might be a dangerous star and a bunch of dead planets, even if it did host the Foundation at one time. After that, if they don't leave the Outer Reach, they would be invisible, and more importantly, they would be free. They can bide their time, build up their strength, and become what they need to be to shorten that period of darkness, according to psychohistory. As he gets ready to return to the vault, they ask if they'll see him again. He expects that to be the case because this isn't the Foundation's first crisis, and it won't be the last. They bought themselves some time, but war with Empire is inevitable. He tells them to remember this day, remember what they're striving for, and remember that 1,000 years can seem like a long time, but it's only a blip on the history of civilization. And if they're not vigilant, this opportunity that they have could slip right through their fingers. As he was talking, he realized Gale wasn't there and that she never made it to Terminus. In that exchange, he meets Salvor, but it's clear that he didn't anticipate her or know who she was. So as he's leaving, she asks him about the visions that she's been having, and he doesn't know what she's talking about. She explains that she used them to help her solve the crisis, and he assures her that the visions didn't come from him, and then the projection goes back inside the vault and it closes up and it looks like it did beforehand. So what does it mean for the Foundation? We see that the cultures are willing to work together. There's an exchange where Rowan gives the Grand Huntress's bow to Salvor in an act of peace, and they plant a sapling from Anacreon together at the site of Farah's burial. Mari and the other Foundationers are angry, they feel betrayed, and it's not so much that Harry didn't tell them what was going to happen, but that he lied to them. Salvor's in a similar situation. She grew up thinking that the ghost was talking to her, that Harry Seldon was talking to her through the vault. She started to believe that she was special, and now she has no idea where the visions were coming from. There's a time lapse of the colony growing over the next few months. Everyone has come together and they're taking Harry's words to heart, setting aside their hatred in favor of strength and moving forward with the Foundation. They repair the Invictus and Hugo becomes the captain. He goes out and generates the Mega Flare, allowing them to be free. And now that they have the technology, we learn that it'll take them about 18 months until they can start building new ships. For her crucial role in the crisis, Salvor is set to become the next mayor, but she has another vision where she sees a young Gale. She goes to see her mother, asking her about who the girl from the water planet was. This leads to the big reveal that Gale and Rach were her biological parents, and the visions were related to their memories rather than Harry. She knows that Gale escaped the slow ship in a cryopod, and decides that she needs to leave Terminus and go look for her. She decides she wants to leave right away because she's afraid that she'll change her mind, and her mother gives her blessing and the Prime Radiant to take with her. She goes to the beggar and Hugo finds her before she leaves. They have their goodbye and we get an understanding of where her head's at. She thinks this is something that she needs to do alone. And when he asks where she's going, she just says that she has a hunch and she leaves. As has often been the case in this first season, where things get really interesting is on Trantor, and what happened to Azora, Brother Dawn, and the conspiracy. Brother Day has returned to the planet, and his trip to the Maiden has changed his thinking. Brother Dusk wants to destroy Dawn and replace him. And when Day goes to talk to him, he says, "You're not one of us. Your DNA has been altered in a dozen ways." He wants to know how long he's known, and this brings about a really interesting conversation about how they aren't even really people, they're just echoes of the first Cleon, and hasn't Day himself ever wanted to leave this place, be something more than just an installment in this ongoing story. When he goes to speak with Azora, he explains that he understands that people hate him, but says that his detachment from them is what makes it possible for him to rule effectively. It's a strange burden not being able to carry a burden. The brothers care for each other, they love each other, and they shift that burden between each other. He views Dawn as his son. He rocked him as a baby, he cultivated him, and Azora took all of that away from him. So he wants to take away her legacy, and they located every person, family, friends, lovers, and so on, anyone that would remember her after she was gone. It's a total of 1,551 people. They have them all under surveillance, and there's a particle beam focused on their brainstem, so that when he gives the signal, they'll all be killed. And right after he explains this, he gives the signal, so they're all dead. He then tells her what her fate will be. She'll be put into automated extreme isolation, where she'll be sensory shrouded, but she'll still be aware. And he's doing that so that she can remember what she took from him. And it's a brutal fate no matter how you look at it. Demerzel comes to Dawn, she tells him it's time, and on their walk to the throne room, he says that she must hate him. She assures him that's not the case. She actually loves him. And when he says that it's only because she's programmed to, she explains that all love is programmed, biological or otherwise, saying that when a human mother looks at her child, their brainwaves synchronize. When he's brought before Dusk and Day, it's clear that Dusk hasn't changed his mind at all, but he has to default to the middle throne. Brother Day explains on his trip he had much time to reflect on their dynasty. He talks about the pilgrims he met who worked their whole lives just to walk a spiral of salt in hopes that they might be granted a vision before they die. He talks about the challenge from Halima. He brings up Harry Seldon, how he prophesies something similar, and declares that a bow incapable of bending will eventually break. He says it's time the dynasty bent just a little. Brother Dusk is not willing to go along with this, and they start fighting. He's convinced that it'll ruin their dynasty, and he threatens to decant another day rather than allowing the altered Dawn to live. As they continue to fight, Dawn goes to Demerzel for protection, and she holds him like a child, stroking his hair. Brother Dusk shouts, "We are Empire, history bends to us," and as he's saying that, Demerzel snaps Brother Dawn's neck, killing him instantly. When Brother Day protests, yelling no, she tells him that she's loyal to the Cleonic dynasty above all else. After he disintegrates the body, the Shadow Master comes to him to say that the rebels' plans to undermine the dynasty appear to be more extensive than they first believed. They thought the gene editing was limited entirely to Brother Dawn's person, and that it was done after he was incarnated, which is what the other clone told him whenever he was in the scar. After more testing, though, they found out that the source itself was adulterated. As were the replacements, those are no longer pure copies. So the source material is gone, Brother Dawn is dead, and they can't replace him with another pure clone. Even Day himself could be altered, they don't know that yet, as well as Brother Dusk, who's being tested right at that moment. He sends the Shadow Master away, and in a rage, he smashes the glass case containing the original Cleon I. Then Demerzel goes back to her room, takes off her salt bracelet, and looks in the mirror. She looks troubled, she opens her kit and grabs a tool before tossing it aside, and then tears her face off as she screams. And with a lot of unanswered questions about the future, the Trantor storyline ends there. So what happened with Gale and Salvor Hardin? Well, we get one last scene that takes place 138 years later. We see Gale arrive on Sinex. She's able to find her home. There's no signs of life there anymore, maybe not any on the planet at all, as we see that the water is much higher. As she's mourning, she sees a light under the water and decides to go find out what it is. It turns out to be the beggar, and inside she finds Salvor in a cryopod. She gets her out of the water and wakes her up, and when she asks her what happened, she explains that she crash landed. She's been in cryosleep for more than a century and says that she was there looking for someone, which of course she was looking for Gale, and she tells her, "I'm Salvor Hardin, your daughter," and then she hands her the Prime Radiant, and the episode ends there. So in the end, where are we at? The Foundation survived the first crisis and came out of it with an alliance in the Outer Reach that will make them stronger. One version of Harry Seldon's consciousness exists inside the vault to be a reassuring presence at the very least. The initial reason he got the Encyclopedist exiled to Terminus was a lie, but things appear to be on course for the plan, and psychohistory should serve its purpose to shorten the Dark Age that will come after the fall of the Galactic Empire. Periodic crises are baked into that, and Harry should re-emerge accordingly. Gale and Salvor are mother and daughter, and they have these unique abilities they don't quite understand. They're together, but their future is uncertain. Considering they have the Prime Radiant, I have some ideas based on what I know from reading the books, but I won't go into those here. Their being on Sinex means that they're somewhat isolated, but considering the Foundation has at least one jump ship now, they could be reconnected without another prolonged period of cryosleep. Either way, enough time has passed that things are completely different on Terminus, and it's going to take time for that story to catch up to where they're at. The Cleonic Dynasty also has an uncertain future. The only thing that seems certain is that it won't be carrying on like it has for the last 400 years. They left things pretty wide open as far as whether Brother Dusk and Brother Day were altered, and there really wasn't any progress as far as finding out who's behind the conspiracy. Demerzel's final scene was fascinating, and I think one of my next videos will be talking about what I think's going on there. For now, it appears that Cleon I altered her programming to be loyal to the Cleonic Dynasty above all else, and the things that she has to do in relation to that are taking a toll on her. It'll be interesting to see how she responds to the dilemma of having no new clones or pure genetic material to continue the dynasty as they've known it. For a review, this first season had its issues, especially in the structure and pacing of the early-middle episodes. Overall, the Terminus storyline was noticeably weaker than the story with the Cleons, and there were places where it just didn't work for me. I'm sure some of that can be chalked up to the pandemic, but it also felt to me that they defaulted to try to do a cool action thing in a lot of situations with mixed results. I do give them credit for the effort though. Looking back, they did a lot of crazy things, and I think generally speaking, it's always good to see a show that takes chances, and I'm hoping that they'll be able to identify what worked and what didn't, and come back with a much stronger effort in the second season. There was a lot of effort to develop the characters, and again, I think this worked a whole lot better on the Trantor side of things. But as far as the finale's concerned, it felt like a step up across the board in that department. So at least it feels like they're going in the right direction there, even with having so many different stories that all felt somewhat different to tie up in 1 hour-long episode. From Asimov, they've got a toolbox to pull from that includes some great twists and turns based on psychohistory. And the part they introduced themselves, the Genetic Dynasty, has turned out to be a great addition. They managed to pull off some great sci-fi and character stuff at the same time. There's so much rolled up in that dynamic, and I love the progression of Brother Day through his trip, then coming back to his interactions with Dusk and Dawn and Azora respectively, only to be completely invested in what was going on in his decision, and then actually shocked at what Demerzel did. The thought of Brother Day being on the verge of changing things, only to have it snatched away by a failsafe that we have to assume was instituted by the original Cleon, that was the highlight of the season. The most powerful person in the galaxy is trapped in that cycle. There's really nothing they can do to change things, and now there's no way to continue that. So even with the issues it had, I'm pretty happy with where we're at. I'm curious to see where they go from here, and I'm glad I watched it